Now, Corey, you and I have spoken many times about the importance of customer journey, especially as a foundation of effective marketing, how it guides us to ensure that we're meeting our customers' needs, their wants and motivations, and then also how it impacts our ability to stand out to our customers as well. So I've got a graphic here, and I was hoping, can you speak a little bit more to what the customer journey is exactly and why it should be our foundation for marketing?
Yeah. So again, like I said, one of the main challenges that we saw when working with practices is doctors, they didn't have clear intentions as to what they were trying to accomplish and measuring those outcomes. And so they would start a social media campaign, or they'd do an awareness event with some sort of in-person efforts like free ice cream or a sip and scan or something like that. But everything, it was just these outward efforts to try to grab attention. And what we did is took a step back and said, with so many people needing care and so few doctors ultimately able to give that care, where's the disconnect? Why are they struggling when so many people are looking? And we really we shifted from the how do we gain attention to where's the customer falling out? What's not connecting? And that's where the customer journey comes into play. So anybody who makes any purchase of anything goes through the same stages. They have the first awareness stage where they recognize that a problem exists, and then they consider the options to solve that problem. They make a decision on whether or not they're going to purchase or move forward with that product or service. With the retention phase, they decide whether they're going to use it again or not. And then there's the advocacy on how they talk about it, whether it's positive, negative, or not at all.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I'm going to add a little bit more context to this graphic a bit, because for our endodontic customers, we're really looking at two sets of customers, right? We're looking at referring dentists and we're looking at patients. Now, for today, we're going to be focused on referring dentists, but we will circle back to patients in a follow-up webinar. So definitely be sure that you join us for that. Now, I think it's fair to say that we can often generalize what we think our referring dentist might need, and we can get pretty close, right? But when we're stuck and we can't quite figure out, okay, why aren't our referrals growing and what should I be doing to make that happen? It can be hard to know exactly where to pivot those strategies. And that's why the customer journey is really so fundamental to helping us determine the most effective way for us to take care of them at every turn. As Corey said, this is basically what every customer is going to go through, and they can be at various phases. So it's like, how do we take care of them at each one of those stages? Now we're going to work our way all the way through these stages, but we're going to start with awareness first. All right, now as you start to build your brand awareness in your community, it's really super important that you would identify key players that are going to be essentially your potential referring practices, right? If you're in a particularly saturated area, this can feel super overwhelming, and that's completely understandable. But the key here is that we're not really trying to cater to everyone. Statistically speaking, a single provider endodontic practice can sustain having just 3 to 5 really solid referring doctors. Now, you might still get other referrals here and there are definitely going to be some patients that self-refer themselves to you for sure to help fill in those gaps. But when we talk about 3 to 5 really solid referring dentists, we're encouraging you to focus on creating that strong like inner circle of people that are going to be your consistent referrals instead of trying to accommodate the masses. That's where a lot of that overwhelm can come from. If we feel like, gosh, how the heck am I going to take care of all of my referring dentists in this area that are just so many, and where do I start? Now, if you don't already have one, I do recommend starting a referral tracking system. This can be just a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. We're just tracking referring dentists in your area, right? Now in Dental EMR, our clients use our internal referral tracking system to create this database of refers. It doesn't really matter what it is, whatever your preference is. You just need a space to be able to track those potential referring dentists and be able to notate what their specific needs and preferences are so you can be sure to accommodate those as you go along.
This is one of the most important pieces that we found is just the tracking, is making sure that you know the effort that you're putting into your different campaigns or with these referrals, so that you know you're putting the most amount of time that you can into the people, the relationships that are the strongest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very similar to analytics across the board, right? Without some sort of analytics, it's hard for us to know what's working and what's not working. So we need to be able to track that so we get a good, really solid feel of when we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that can be two different things depending on if you're new or an existing practice. So for new practices, your goal with this referral tracking system is to establish these relationships by making a solid first impression. Whereas if you're an established practice, that goal might look a little different. That's going to be more like fortifying these existing relationships that you already have. Maybe you have some referring dentists that have already sent you a couple of patients here and there, but really your goal here is determining who has the greatest potential for continued referrals. Again, really defining that inner circle as much as you possibly can. All right. Now that we've been able to identify who those key players are in our community, it is time to put feet on the ground with a personal intro. Now, this is your opportunity to get face-to-face with your referring dentist and their staff. I'm going to emphasize and their staff as much as possible because it is very important that you establish relationships with both the dentist and the administrators that would be assisting with the referral process. We're going to circle back to this a little bit more because you're going to find I'm very passionate about making sure you build a rapport with their staff. Now, when we talk about the personal intro, we do like to make a comparison to this being similar to a job interview because I think everyone can relate to a job interview. We're like, oh, we don't want to do it, right? We're like, I got to go in there and I got to make small talk and I got to make the best impression. And it can be a little nerve-wracking, especially for those that struggle maybe with kind of having those one-on-one conversations when you're just going into an office. But if you've ever been on job interviews before, you know that they do get easier and easier the more you do them. And that's definitely the case here. Really, the goal is you're personally showing up to make the best impression. You're making sure that you're putting their needs first. And you're asking those helpful questions that really prompt those valuable conversations. So again, all of that should sound really familiar, right? Because we do that in job interviews. Now, I can't emphasize enough here how important it is to establish a rapport with the dental staff. It's one of those things where the staff really have a great deal of influence over the referring process, and they know what's working and what's not working. So involving them in this step will help you stand out greatly to your referring dental offices. This is another one I emphasize. Show up as yourself. It's always important to, as the endodontist, show up and make these personal in-touch connections. And really, in a new practice, that's going to be super easy because you're more likely to have the time to do this, right? Maybe your practice isn't open yet, or your practice is open and you have less busy days or patients, your patient schedule isn't as busy. So that's fantastic. You'll be able to accommodate that a bit better. But as an established practice, this gets a little trickier. It can definitely be tempting to send a marketing manager in your place, but really making the time to visit referring dental offices like per week as the endodontist creates a much more impactful experience. Now, as you can imagine, if you are in a particularly saturated area, you're going to need to carve out some consistent time to do this. And this is the part where I say, don't let this overwhelm you, right? Because we might be starting with a large list of potential referring dentists in your area. And if you're starting from scratch, you need to just kind of bite off some of that a little bit at a time. As long as you're consistent, then you can definitely get out there and get a sense of which referring dentists are going to be the best connection for you. If you're an established practice, this might be a little bit easier. You might already know which referring dentists are kind of at the top of that list, and maybe that's where you start to focus your energy. It can definitely take time to do this. So for those established practices, I do recommend, instead of interrupting a whole day of patient care, perhaps taking aside, a half day every week. And this strategy really just ensures that you're making the most of your time investment and you're gradually and consistently growing your referral networks. I think that's the key here. We have a tendency to not put as much focus on making these personal intros on a consistent basis, but the consistency is really what's going to help you continue to grow that network. I think you can speak to that too, Corey, right? Consistency in marketing is key.
Yeah, with such a busy world, it's so easy for us to get distracted. I think that right now the average attention span of a human's about 3 seconds. I think we're less than a goldfish with so much information coming in. And so especially with these personal introductions, we use the analogy like dating. Like it really is building those relationships and not expecting that immediate connection right off the bat. The marriage proposal doesn't come on the first introduction. And so making that time to go and actually genuinely and authentically introducing yourself and meeting the other person, the other practice and doctor and their staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
While keeping top of mind.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we're going to dig into that even more at this point. So we know how important those consistent personal face-to-face interactions are, but if you don't have the proper questions to ask when you get there, these types of interactions can definitely feel like a total waste of time, not only for you, but also their busy office that you're visiting. So, I do hear a lot from endodontists that are expressing frustration in this area. Like, oh, well, they don't really care about what we're doing, or they don't necessarily want to provide any help or assistance in the referral process. Or maybe it might look like they just don't have the time to chat with me. And most of the time I feel like it's just a waste of my time to go and make these personal intros. And while that might be true in some cases, okay, there are going to be some practices that are maybe a little bit more shut off than others. The simple fact of that is it may just be that they're not a good fit. And that's totally okay. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do these personal intros, to narrow down your inner circle, so that way you know exactly where you want to invest your time and energy. Otherwise, it is going to feel like you're taking all this time to reach out to these offices and you're really not getting anything back from it. Okay. So let's look at some of those questions so that way we have some guidance here when we're walking in for those personal intros. So you could argue that most practices actually do care very deeply about what they need, right? And what their patients need. It's not necessarily that they don't care about the interaction overall. It's just their priorities are maybe in a different place. And it's a matter of figuring out what that is exactly. Now, when you're visiting them in the middle of a busy day, it can sometimes be a little hard to gather feedback, right? That's why we ask very specific questions. And believe it or not, one of the most important questions that you can ask following introducing yourself is, do you have a few minutes to chat? That's a big deal, right? Like it's an icebreaker. So as someone who personally worked in a general dentist office, I can tell you with confidence, number one, it's always more considerate to ask instead of just assuming that they have time to chat. But number two, it's actually super impactful for you to make it a point to address the staff instead of just introducing yourself and saying, hey, is Dr. So-and-so available to chat? That's a big deal, right? Now, worst case scenario, they're not interested, or they say, no, we don't have time to chat. That's actually great feedback. I mean, I always say, amazing. That's better than getting, shady feedback where you're not really sure where the office stands, in terms of a referral relationship. So, this really helps us better define, again, our inner circle and learn which practices we want to invest our time in. I suspect in most cases, if you take the time as the endodontist to make that intro yourself and ask them if they have a few minutes to chat, most often than not, they're going to say, yeah, sure. What's going on? They'll make time for you. Now, once you've broken the ice and you have their attention at that point, you can definitely use these question prompts that we have for you here. These are really going to drive problem-solving conversations. And that's important because we don't want to just ask general questions that might be difficult for them to provide feedback. We want to ask very specific questions that get to the root of their frustrations, right? We're building trust here. We're making a good impression on that team. And these questions are driven to show historically what a lot of referring dentists have struggled with in the past, but it opens the door really well for them to be able to give feedback specifically to their concerns, their frustrations, what they're saying on a consistent basis. So we're not really generalizing the issues here, but we are setting the stage for those answers for sure.
These ones are great too, because it helps build trust and authority from your standpoint that, when you ask point blank, they may not have the answer right away, but you know the questions to ask. We use these as customer development interviews when we're developing new products or services specifically for people. And we can ask those specific questions like these. What struggles have you faced before when referring patients that I can head off for you? That's a great one. Or are there specific factors you look for when making referrals to patients? That can key that thought process to help them trigger that awareness that a problem exists. And then you can be the solution to that problem.
Absolutely. And I've definitely seen it before, like without these questions, they may not be forthcoming with that information. And that's not necessarily because they're being rude. I mean, it's simply because you've met them in the middle of the day when they weren't prepared for your visit, and you're now asking them like, what do you need?
Right.
And I don't know if you've ever been busy between patient care before and someone came to you and just, asked you a very just kind of vague question. You're like, I don't know. I'm not in the headspace. I'm not prepared right now.
More time in my day.
I don't know. Exactly. So these are very specific. You can adjust them a little bit more if you want to, but these really get to the nitty-gritty of what I would think are what we see to be really the focus areas of problems and frustrations for a lot of referring dentists. They're different for every practice. Absolutely. Some practices have a lot of these things figured out and they're very sure and confident about what they're doing. Others are kind of trying to figure it out as they go. And perhaps that is your entry point for being able to determine, I can help you with that. I can step in and make that easier for you.
Yeah, it showcases that you care about them. You're not just in it to get patients and make money for your practice. You truly want to be a value add for them in their practice.
Well, and what I love about this from the endodontic side, right? You're the endodontist going to talk to the staff and you're asking these questions. This is a big deal. You're asking these questions, you're listening, you're learning about what can really help them. That helps you stand out tenfold. Like seriously, take a pen and pad, take notes. That's a big deal because a lot of these staff members are used to specialists that are either sending marketing managers in their stead, or they are coming in and immediately asking for the doctor. They're making absolutely no effort to really figure out what from the administrative side of things is giving you guys trouble with referrals and how can I and my team assist you in that process and make that even easier.
Or like you said, take a pen and pad, write it down.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to need it anyway, unless you have like a really extraordinary memory. You're going to need to write that down so that when you go back to your spreadsheet or wherever you're tracking your referrals, you can jot down what their concerns were. And there's really nothing better. We are going to circle back to this, but there's really nothing better than being able to notate a problem, helping solve it, and then circle back after a period of time and saying, so how is that going? Is that getting better? This is like when you're a patient and you have a specific need. There's nothing better than having a doctor call you or a nurse call you and ask you specifically about that problem that you had to begin with, instead of just saying, so how are you doing? How are you feeling? It really helps to create that trust and that bond with that referring dentist, or that office, I should say. Awesome. Now, one of the I guess there's like two of my favorites here. I do love finding out if they need same day and next day emergency care. We'll circle back to that. And we will definitely circle back to the point of contact for sure. There's a motive behind these questions.
Something tells me it has to do with standing out.
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. So once you've been able to gather this valuable feedback from your referring offices, this is when you can start to get really creative and serious about how you can cater to their needs. Now, overall, this process is really meant to feel less like a moving target, right? There's nothing worse than that. This is more of an effective strategy that really makes the most of your time and theirs. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about a few examples of how to stand out, but it's entirely possible that you're going to be able to come up with a whole lot more than what we have here. These are just some examples of what we see commonly, needed or craved in a lot of referring dental offices. But you're going to want to take the feedback you gather from those questions and even maybe create your own solutions that help you stand out in your community. Now, I always love starting with low-hanging fruit, right? This is why I love that question about, do you need same day or next day care for your patients? Do you find yourself in a position of needing that level of service? And that means that you can offer emergency appointments as a way to stand out. Now, whether you're a new practice or you're an established practice, offering same day or next day emergencies is a solid strategy for providing service to those referring dentists, especially since most of the established practices in your area are probably booked out for days, if not weeks in advance. So if they don't know that one endodontist that they can call if they have a patient in dire need, it's going to be hard for them to kind of figure out where they want to send their patient. So imagine you being that one provider. And if they have that problem, they know exactly where to find you for that referral. Now, this means being disciplined enough in your scheduling strategy to save emergency spots. You can put them in the first part of the morning or maybe towards the end of the day. They don't necessarily have to be in the middle of the day. In fact, those are the two most, I would say, strategic points of the day, just because it allows you to see a patient first thing in the morning if they need to come in next day. And if it's same day care, you still have some time at the end of that afternoon where you can see them. Really, all we're doing here is we're affording ourselves the opportunity to say, if you have those needs, I have those spots available in my schedule to make it happen. And that simply translates to your ability to bail out that referring dentist if they do have a patient in dire need or pain of seeing a patient that day. As a colleague of mine who is a general dentist, for just an example of a referral that really stood out to him and earned his business long term. And he told me that there was this one patient case where he had an extraction and it was an ankylosed tooth, and he couldn't quite make headway. And he obviously couldn't leave the patient in that state. And he was really starting to sweat it out, right? This is right before the weekend. He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So we called the oral surgeon directly, and the oral surgeon said, send the patient right over. So oral surgeon took right care of the patient, just right then in that moment, and then called him back after the treatment was completed and said, no problem, patient's all good to go, positive outcome, he has what he needs for the weekend. If you need anything else, let me know. And he said from that moment on, he earned my business. Now, I took that story and I broke it apart because I want to see what the oral surgeon is doing right in this scenario. Right. And one of the things that stood out to me was that he provided a point of contact to reach him in case of emergencies. He did obviously offer the same day treatment because he had the time available on his schedule so he could ensure that positive patient outcome. Patient wasn't having to wait in kind of this, partial extraction state. And then ultimately he helped this general dentist in a jam, right? So there weren't any further complications that came about from that patient's treatment. When I asked my colleague, he said, and I quote, he basically saved my butt. So it's that kind of experience that really sticks with you, right? When you're fearful that something could negatively come out of the patient experience and you have to lean on a colleague or a specialist to be able to bail you out or help you in those cases that are a little bit more complex. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. When you are reaching out to these referring dentists, you can offer them that same day or next day care, as long as you've made room for it in your schedule. And that may be where you say, call my treatment coordinator. This is their number. They'll get you taken care of right away. If you can't offer them your cell phone, that's the next best thing, to have that point of contact in your office. Right. Now, the other way that you can stand out, or at least the second way that we're offering here, is maybe possibly an unpopular opinion slightly. In this example, we're actually challenging the idea of hiring a marketing manager. So instead, what we're recommending is that you hire what would be referred to as a referred treatment coordinator role in your practice. Now, really, the point of this role is to serve as a personal liaison to your referring practices, right? This might be a single point of contact who mediates communication, continuity of care. Maybe this person facilitates your patient follow-up calls, checks in on patients the day after treatment, a week after treatment, whatever that might look like for you. Maybe this person is updating your referring practices upon treatment completion. You can still have this role keeping an eye on like marketing reports. So when it's time to send you out to various offices, they have a good idea of which offices you're going to be focusing on in that time period. Or they can do other marketing workflows like coordinating open house events, ordering marketing collateral, all of those types of things. But the key here is that we're expanding what would normally be a general marketing role into something that is really worth its weight in gold when you think about it. This role is personalizing the referral experience, so you get a much larger return on investment instead of just someone who spends all of their hours running reports, which doesn't take very long, and then driving out and going to offices and meeting with those referring dentists. Now, when I was, in our general dentist office, we had a periodontist office that we referred to on a consistent basis. And I had a point of contact at that periodontist office, and she was available to reach out to whenever we had a question about patient care, we had an emergency appointment, needed, follow-up, whatever that was. But having that point of contact, that relationship, built so much confidence in our referrals that we really didn't bother sending patients anywhere else. I mean, it was really a no-brainer, honestly. We knew she was able to take care of our patients, and there was no question at that point where we wanted to send our patients for perio care. So I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to have someone who is that liaison between those offices and can be that point person to ensure that things are getting taken care of and things don't fall through the cracks. Now, I do want to kind of hint the subtlety of this role name. This is Referred Treatment Coordinator, which this title to me is much more impactful than, like, let's say, like a marketing manager, right? Which can sometimes have a connotation that the goal for that role is simply to drive sales, right? So even in its name, this is indicating that it's an advocate in their corner for anything that they need potentially for referred patient care at that point. Now, if you do have an existing office manager in your practice at this time, I don't recommend having the office manager take on the roles that would be the referred treatment coordinator. This role shouldn't really be, encumbered by any sort of billing, collections, insurance, or like other financial workflows. We want to make sure that this is a role that has time to consistently commit to building those referral relationships. And usually when you're looking at an office manager role, there are a lot more other things that can kind of take away from that consistency, right? We're talking about marketing consistency and ensuring that we have the ability to commit the necessary time to build those relationships and always have the momentum building. So this should not be a full-time office manager that does this on the side. If you're really committed to hiring a marketing manager, we're recommending that you hire for this role instead. It just has a much larger return on investment.
One of the biggest benefits here, looking back at the customer journey, once you recognize that a problem exists, you're now going through considerations on how to solve that problem. And so if that first effort to reach out to you as a solution doesn't go through, that customer is going to keep considering other options. We're trying to minimize any of those pitfalls where they can fall out of keeping you as an option. This is a great way to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is so similar to just an account manager, right? How many times have we signed up for a service and it was the account manager that was the make or break situation of that particular service because we knew we didn't have to go to a general support line or reach out to a department that could take a really long time to get back to us. It's having that concierge like feel that really creates this experience of no matter what challenges they may face or what problems they have that one person that they can go to. And because it is one person responsible for doing those things, it's less likely to fall through the cracks. Feels more consistent for sure. I think consistency is the word of the day.
Yeah, and we can all relate to that time where you really need help in that moment and you can't get a hold of the person that you need to. It's such a frustrating feeling.
Yeah.
But when you make that call and that person is there and they're there to help, it's just so relieving, and it really builds again that trust and authority and solidifies that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, moving right along, we have patient comfort services as our next way that you can stand out. Now, there's no secret whatsoever that many patients struggle with dental care in general, let alone with root canal services. So when you're able to accommodate your patients and create more of that soothing, comfortable environment, they're far more likely to seek out your practice for that type of care, right? So patient comfort services really means just incorporating really simple yet effective items into your patient care. You know, that could be something as simple as a warm blanket, noise canceling headphones, especially for those that are sensory sensitive patients. You might have a neck rest available for them if it doesn't cause too many issues during your treatment. Another idea might be providing an eye mask. Right? Again, really, this is anything that's disposable or that you can reasonably launder or clean between patients, because the most important aspect here is that we're helping the patient forget that they're in the dental chair. We're basically emphasizing the fact that their comfort is first and foremost. And this really is not only appealing to our patients, but it ensures better treatment outcomes for us as providers. I mean, you're talking about lower blood pressure, less anxiety, less complications. Overall positive experience is always good because we want to circle back to that in the advocacy phase. But these are really, I would say that these are often overlooked, but they are yet again low-hanging fruit. These are definitely achievable, even in a small office. And if you can provide this and advertise this to your referring dentist as a place where, you know, their most anxious patients might be better suited to go, then that's going to help you stand out for sure.
Yeah, that definitely hits on both retention and advocacy. If a referring dentist hears good experiences from their patients about you, it makes them look good and it makes you look good. And that bolsters that relationship in future referrals.
Absolutely. Sedation is our next item that we're covering. And while this is definitely considered a patient comfort service, sedation it's in its own category. And that's mainly because it does require a lot more steps to make it happen in your practice. This may be something that you're having to seek continuing education or certifications for. Maybe you want to offer oral conscious sedation in your practice, or you might be looking to hire someone to provide intravenous sedation. There's a lot more to consider here, right? And there's more liability to be aware of as well. So that means that this isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for everyone. But I can tell you for sure, it is a surefire way to stand out. Absolutely. There are not a lot of offices that provide sedation across the board. And there are many patients that are going to seek it out. So whether that's due to trauma or jaw issues, having this option can be a huge differentiator for you in your community. One example is my husband had a root canal on ship in the military without proper anesthesia, and he now suffers from TMJ. It's very difficult for him to open his mouth very wide and for long periods of time. So when he's looking for dental care, sedation is way up high on that list of services he's vetting, right? I mean, that is basically the first thing that he's looking for. And that's really true for many patients, especially when we're talking about root canal services where the mouth is open wide for a very long period of time. We have a dental dam in the mouth. It can be very uncomfortable even for patients that, like myself, that don't have dental anxiety, right? It's you're in a position where you're not as comfortable as you could be. So providing sedation, if it's a possibility for your practice and you've been weighing the pros and cons, this is a big win for referral differentiation for sure. Next, we have CEUs and education resources, or educational resources, I should say. Again, this is really maybe not a good fit for everyone. It really just depends on kind of what you want to be in terms of an influencer in your particular area in your community. Providing CEU events or sponsored lunch and learns is really a great way to get your practice on the map, especially as an industry leader. It can really help you network, especially if you're doing like these really coordinating large events or speaking engagements where you're bringing people in. That is an opportunity to get a lot of your referring dentists and their staff in one room at the same time, right? So that can be really impactful. It can also take a lot of work to coordinate speakers and venues and catering. So it's really one of those things where it can help you stand out, but it is going to take a bit more work to make it happen. And it's not likely something that you're going to be able to possibly afford in your practice until you're much more established. So this is something to keep in mind, that if you want to start providing these services in the future or in the near future, this is definitely something that you could do to put your practice on the map. Now, if you're someone who wants to share educational resources, but maybe you don't have the time or the the finances to invest in these larger CEU events, one alternative would be to provide educational resources to your referring practices. And maybe that looks like educating your dentists on what to look out for when it comes to maybe a complex endodontic case or particularly risky outcomes. You can do this. Corey, I think you and I talked about like newsletters and all sorts of different ways that you can deliver this information. Some, as you've seen before, some endodontists do YouTube pages, or maybe they post on social media. Really, the goal of this is it can be very helpful for disarming those referring dentists that are more likely to attempt complex endo cases themselves. They may not want to refer to you right away, but if they understand that these complex cases can cause them lost time and revenue, especially if they attempt them and they get midway through and they've got to, have you come bail them out, they might be more inclined to seek your help for specialized care from the beginning. So this really speaks to those endodontists that are prefer to educate. Maybe that's your MO. You really love the education spectrum. You like being an industry leader and you want to share that with the referring dentist in your area. And having those resources available to them helps you stay top of mind, especially as an industry leader. We're all about staying top of mind, right, Corey?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, this was something that Alex and I, the co-founder of Hamilton Wise, that we put together for our doctors, was recognizing one of the challenges in consistently going to practices and being in person. It does take time. And how do we keep top of mind on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis when you can't just consistently be going in the practice all the time? And one of those was marketing and sending email, just simple emails of just that from a specialist point of view. These are some things that I've seen. This is what you can look out for to make your life easier. You're simply providing value and trying to be helpful and dropping in there. If you have any challenges, I'm always here to help. And at very minimum, they see your name in their inbox on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So when somebody comes in and they go, oh, I've got to refer somebody out, you're the first name that they think of because they see it, even if they didn't read the email. But if they do, not only are they thinking about you, but they're saying, oh, and he's got my best interest and my patient's best interest at heart. It's a great way to build trust and authority and stay top of mind consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times you can't really force your customers into certain situations or believing in certain things. Like one example that comes to mind is we have a lot of our endodontists that start with Dental EMR. We have a portal, right, that we use to help communicate letters. And a lot of the questions we get are like, do referring dentists really participate in this portal? And the key is not to ask them to participate in the portal. The key is to let them know that you've now configured a way for them to get reports and history without them having to scrounge for them. They don't have to look in their inbox, worry about missing updates. If they want to log in whenever they want, they get that access because the portal is built for them. Now, as they get familiar, that's when they start to use the electronic submission function to send you patients that way. And it's because we didn't approach this whole portal idea as this is something you need to care about, right? It's like comparing it to this. You need to stop doing the complex endodontic cases and send them to me instead. Instead, we're flipping that script a little bit and saying, we understand that you might want to do that. So we're going to give you the resources to be successful. And then if you decide it's not really worth my time, I'll do it this way instead. Kind of works backwards, right? Because we're focusing on what they need to be successful first. And then saying, if you ever get into a position where you decide it's not worth your time and you'd rather use the resources we have available to you, I'm here when you need me, kind of thing. All right. So the last bit that we have here is hosting an open house. Now, this is often at the beginning of a practice opening, right? This is pretty common. We see new practices will be open for a couple of months. They'll do kind of a soft launch, and then they'll have an open house to invite referring dentists into your practice. It can be a little difficult to scrounge everyone together, right? Because especially if you're coming into a community where you're not fully established yet, it might be kind of hard to convince them to come see your practice and why they should care early on. So we actually encourage you to have like an annual open house. Don't just have one when you open. Create an annual open house. Maybe it's at a particular time of the year and it's consistent every year. But this really gives you an opportunity to welcome those referring dentists into your practice. This is your space, right? Help them get a feel for it. Help them understand what patients see or experience when they're coming in for patient care. The more they know what to expect in the patient care process, the better off they're going to be for feeling comfortable about referring. They're going to be able to explain it to the patient better, because we all know patients definitely have questions about that. And this is their opportunity to ask questions one-on-one with your team. They can establish those in-person relationships. This isn't like oh yeah, I know Kanya over at so-and-so practice, but I've never met her before. No, I get to see Kanya and speak to her in person, build those relationships. And now I know who my main contact is over at that office. Plus, you get to feed them a little bit and maybe have some fun. If you have some funds to, I think the last specialist open house I went to, they were giving away a kayak. I did not win said kayak, but I was kind of bummed about it, for sure. All right. Now, the last step that we have, which is good because it looks like we are coming close to time, is adapt. And this really has to do with the long-term retention, the advocacy. We want to be able to continue this process and make sure that we are consistently building momentum. Now, this might seem like a super simple part of the process, but it's often overlooked, especially if we start to get complacent or comfortable, right? Our practice starts to grow, our schedule does get a bit more consistent. When you really start to build your referral care, checking in with your referring dentist may not feel as important. It may not be as top of mind for you, but the floor can fall out at any time. So it's always best to keep building that momentum and creating these consistencies, right? Whether that's you showing up on a consistent basis. Maybe you're not going every week. Maybe you're going once a month, but you're consistently taking the time once a month to go visit with those referring dentists in person. Maybe your referred treatment coordinator is consistently creating those phone calls and connections on a regular basis for treatment as those patients come in and they're taken care of. Those are all things that helped help build momentum in your business. Now, as you start to build that momentum, it is important to circle back to number 4. We got to ask those questions again. We have to take those question samples that we have and ask them at least every 6 months. Maybe you're putting them into a survey, or maybe you're having your referred treatment coordinator ask the practice managers over the phone. At this point, you might be focusing primarily on your top referrers in your inner circle. You may not be reaching out to all of the practices in your area, but the key is to keep asking. We can't assume that the problems they had 6 months ago and that we successfully solved are the same problems that they're having now, or maybe it's something totally different. I mean, this industry is constantly changing. Patient care, insurance, well, we all know insurance is changing, but what the patient wants and needs. We went through COVID, which completely threw everything on its head when it comes to taking care of our patients and referring dentists. So it's really important that we are creating a space to ask these questions multiple times. And if the feedback changes, we're adapting our strategy accordingly. I'll finish with a quote that I saw, I think it was on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, but it said, "A great business owner is a perpetual problem solver." And I think any business owner at this point can relate to that for sure.
Well, and just, the adapt phase of this is so important because it circles everything back together. This is the importance of data and analytics and keeping track of all of your efforts. You can go back and you're not just making guesses, or I think that worked out well, I don't really remember. Keeping track of all those numbers. When you look at these, that's your true driving force.
Yeah.
Alex, he was working with a practice and they had been running open houses and trying these certain referral strategies, and they weren't working as well as they wanted it to. And so he ended up helping them organize a blood drive for an open house for the referring doctors and their staff and everybody together. And that was what created the community to bring everybody in. And that actually was it was neat.
That's amazing. I've definitely been to one before. It wasn't the kayak one. That one was a little bit more gluttonous. But I've definitely been to an office or an open house before that had it was definitely during the Christmas time. So we had more of the angel drive where you'd bring clothing and really valuable objects for those that were in need. And I thought that was really special because it allowed us all to come together and contribute. It felt like that. It felt very much like a dental community.
And it should. It is a community.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we have a few more minutes left over. It looks like we've got about 8 minutes. We did pretty good on time today.
Not so bad.
we're gonna open the floor for any questions whatsoever. I'm sure there's a couple of things that Corey and I can circle back to in the meantime, but we definitely want to make sure if you have any questions, you want to pop them into the chat, we can address them here. See here, and I'm going to looks like no questions are coming in yet. And that is one thing, speaking kind of more to our portal, we do talk to a lot of endodontists about making information accessible to your referring dentists. We didn't really emphasize it here because I think one of the most obvious ways that endodontists are now trying to stand out to their referring dentists is to ensure that they get their reports as quickly as possible. Some referring dentists are going to have preferences between printed and mailed versus getting electronic reports as soon as possible, right? And then you're also going to have some of those offices that might even want you to send over, a CT so they can see a little bit in more depth of that patient's care. So this is definitely an area of importance. I don't want to overshadow that. It's not necessarily something that we used in this particular webinar because, like I said, I feel like that's pretty much everyone's concern. Like top of mind is like, how do I get these report letters to my referring dentist as quickly as possible? But I did want to circle back to it. Again, our Dental EMR clients use our portal. So really what we're looking to do is ensure that our referring dentists get immediate notification that a letter is ready for them to view. They have access to view that letter in real time. But most importantly, if they are a busy practice and they miss that notification, or they have any questions whatsoever about a patient that came in for treatment 2 weeks ago and they never heard anything back, right? They could have heard something back. They could have received something in their inbox, but if they didn't get a personal phone call from your referral treatment coordinator, they may not be paying attention to it. Or they may need the ability to log into the portal and be able to see those reports and history so they can get caught up on what's left unread, right? So there's a lot of context they can get out of having a resource like that. So again, I didn't really want to overshadow, but that's not necessarily something that isn't already on the mind of endodontists when it comes to standing out, but it is still very equally important for sure. Awesome. I didn't see any other questions that came through. Corey, was there anything that you could think of that we haven't touched on so far?
No, I think we were pretty thorough. Just to reiterate, one of the most important pieces that I like to keep top of mind is being very clear and intentional when you go into a practice, making sure that you're being present and truly being focused on being somebody of value to the people that you're talking to truly introduce yourself and build that relationship, as opposed to get in and get out as quickly as you can because you got 10 practices to hit and you're trying to just tick boxes. People feel that, and they feel if you're in a rush and don't really want to be there or aren't really connected, they don't feel like you care about them. But if you show that you do, and you ask those questions and you're present and you give them your full attention and focus, it goes a long way.
It's amazing what writing notes down can do.
Yes.
It's very subtle, but I mean, you could be scribbling on a notepad for all they know. But if you're writing down notes, it's not just like you're hearing what they have to say, but you're committing it to memory, and you're also showing them that you're willing to take it to your practice and your team and make something come out of it. And that's
don't remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like we do have a question. It says, general dentists continue to want to take on more complex cases. How do you help dentists understand the line at which they should be referring out their patients? That's a great question. And to be honest with you, it varies based upon the treatment complexity. A standard root canal that is, there's no curvature to the roots whatsoever. I'd say even maybe just an anterior root canal is going to probably be a fairly simple root canal for a general dentist to be able to do. Should an endodontist do it? Yeah, probably. I mean, they specialize in this type of care, so they are going to be able to ensure a better outcome overall for the patient. The biggest challenge is when we have complex cases that arise from symptoms or conditions that we weren't able to predict prior to starting the treatment. And that might be calcifications, or perhaps we can't get to the tip of the root, or, the patient has an excessive abscess or infection that we need to address. There's all sorts of cases where a referring dentist could get mid-treatment in a root canal and realize, crap, I'm at the point of no return here and I can't complete this treatment properly. And really, again, the biggest motivator here is that if that referring dentist gets midway through treatment, ethically speaking, it's not an incomplete at that moment. Like they really need to take those funds and give that to the patient to be able to spend at an endodontist who's likely going to be at a higher, price point in terms of treatment. They need to be able to let the patient take that and pay for the completion of treatment over at an endodontist office. So that can get a bit tricky because now the referring dentist is kind of encountered with this conundrum of, well, crap, I just spent an hour and a half in this super difficult root canal just to find out I can't finish it, and I got to send this patient somewhere else, and I can't even get, any sort of my time back for that. So to answer your question, it's really based upon the endodontist's experience and what they're looking to head off ahead of time. If they are seeing a lot of these emergency patients that are coming in due to a particular condition that can be head off at the pass, that's the type of educational resources you are sharing with your referring dentist. This is a specific case we see a lot of. And the outcome is that the referring dentist is spending time and wasting time and revenue attempting to do this. If this is a case that you run into, send them my way and I'll be happy to take care of it for you.
And
And
that's an example.
it's not really like a you're not capable kind of thing. It's a we might have more specialized equipment that can handle it as opposed to you wasting some of your time to do it.
Yeah, that's it. Your time could be better suited elsewhere as opposed to, you know, spinning wheels or burning time in this one specific case. That's where the emails really come in handy, and that's what we've used is if there's specific cases that you can reference, just share that experience and say, hey, this is just something that came up. Here's a case in XYZ where this happened. Just bringing it to your attention. If you see something like this, it's a red flag that this person wasn't aware of. You know, I'm here to
Yeah.
help. If
And if you have a really good relationship with your referring dentist, you might highlight some cases that you really enjoy taking on. Maybe there are certain case studies you're looking
absolutely.
to be able to test out certain treatments, or, again, if you're someone who loves educating, you likely are looking to, expand your specialist reach and trying to, become very niche in the areas of focus that you enjoy most. So if you are looking for those specific cases, you might be sending out information to your referring dentist that says, hey, look out for these specific, cases in an x-ray, or if you have a patient that presents with these certain symptoms, these are the cases that I'm really looking to take on. I would love to be able to take care of that patient and make sure that they get the best care possible. And then, of course, provide you with the most positive outcome. We can't forget that a lot of these treatments end up with a crown restorative treatment. It's extremely important for a referring dentist to get feedback that their patient's care has completed and it's time for them to come back to the referring dentist. So emphasize that this patient may need full-time restorative, or I should say permanent restorative care after the fact. And our goal is to see them as quickly as possible, no matter how complex the case, so we can send them back your way and get them into a long-term restorative care that's going to ensure their success. So,
Yeah, going back to community, it's removing the environment of both people trying to fight and vie for work,
right.
and working together as a community to make sure that the patient has the most seamless and most effective treatment as possible.
Yeah. And you'll find your inner circle here. You're going to find the people that jive with you. And if they don't exactly jive, that's okay. Don't waste a ton of energy on those that maybe don't fit, kind of what you're looking for and what they're looking for. You will find your people. And when you do, hold on to those people.
3 to 5.
That's what's going to drive success. Amazing. Well, we are at time. Thank you guys so